Hello, everyone. Okay, that is coming from Amy's end because I just toggled her mic and I muted Amy and it went away. So let's see. Amy, do you have headphones by any chance? Okay. Let's see. Do you? Oh, it's happening again. Okay, I'm gonna keep that muted. Do either of you have the stream open on a different window or something? Because sometimes a look of recognition. Okay, hold on. Let me unmute again. Hello. Okay, perfect. That is almost always the issue, but thankfully that means that I know how to take care of it pretty quickly and we can move on. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event. Thank you so much for coming. We are celebrating the launch of All the Things We Don't Talk About by Amy Feltman, and we are joined by Dana Isokawa. I'm Laura. I'm the events coordinator here at the Astoria Bookshop, which is the bookshop hosting this event. If you don't know who we are because you found us through the internet or you're a friend of any of the guests, we are a general interest bookstore in Astoria, Queens, and we are so happy to have you here. Before we get started, I want to go through a few housekeeping things. You'll have opportunities to ask questions throughout the whole stream, but I will get to them during the last 15 or so minutes. There is a button down there that says ask a question, and you can submit your own question or vote on others if there's something you really want to see answered. I go from top to bottom, so it helps weed out duplicate questions, which is nice. Let's see. And you can chat with each other on the right. Keep it respectful. No homophobia, racism, misogyny, the works. My rule of thumb is do not type anything you wouldn't want your mother or your boss to see, and that has never steered me wrong. Other than that, you can buy a copy of the book, a signed copy of the book, by pressing that little button that should be below me, I think. It's a green button. It says buy your copy here. You would not only be supporting indie bookstores, but a local author if you did. So you should do that. That was my sales pitch. And other than that, yeah, let's get started by introducing our guests, and then we will get to a reading and discussion. Amy Feltman graduated with an MFA in fiction from Columbia University in 2016 and is Assistant Director of Advertising at Poets and Writers magazine. She is the author of Willa and Hesper, which was longlisted for the National Jewish Book Awards Goldberg Prize for debut fiction. Her writing has appeared in Cosmonauts Avenue, The Believer Logger, The Toasts, The Millions, The Rumpus, Lilith Magazine, Slice Magazine, and elsewhere. She lives with her partner in Astoria, New York. Wildly impressive. Thank you. Dana Isokawa is a writer and editor living in New York City. She is the managing editor of The Margins, a literary magazine of the Asian American Writers Workshop. She is a contributing editor of Poets and Writers magazine and received her MFA in poetry from NYU. Did you guys meet through Poets and Writers, or is that just a coincidence? Okay. All right. With that, I will leave you to it, and I will be back around 7:45.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to be reading. This is, we just published today, so this is really exciting. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm going to read a section that's a little less grim than some of the other starting points in this novel that I thought of. So when this scene starts, Sadie, who is Morgan's love interest, and Morgan, who is a point of view character, have just been having their first kiss. It's a really beautiful moment for Morgan. And then Sadie's mom knocks on the door. When there were 3 long, insistent knocks on the door, Sadie pulled her fingers away from their skin as if she'd been burned. "I'm so sorry," she mouthed, leaping down the ladder to open her bedroom door. She wiped her lips with the edge of her shirt. Morgan stared, frozen, looking at the texture of the popcorn ceiling, and tried to will himself into invisibility. Think of platonic things, Morgan thought desperately. Tom Hanks, sea turtles, mashed potatoes. "Hi, Mom," Sadie said. "What's up?" Sadie, do we have a rule in this house regarding a closed door and company?" "We do," Sadie said. "I'm sorry." "What else?" "I won't do it again, Mom. I'll drop it while you have company, but this conversation is merely on pause," Sadie's mom said. "I know," Sadie said repentantly. "What are you doing home right now?" What was Morgan supposed to do? Should they turn to look at Sadie's mom, introduce themselves? Their current move, playing dead, was probably not right. Every second they stayed, motionless, anxiously burrowed into the twin-size mattress, their first impression was tanking deeper and deeper. "Decided to go grocery shopping tomorrow morning instead," Sadie's mom said. "Let me meet your friend. I'll give you a minute to get down that ladder, friend of Sadie's," she bellowed. Sadie's mom, Diana, Morgan learned, moved through the kitchen like it was lucky to have her in it. In her eggplant purple scrubs and New Balance sneakers, she was dressed like an anonymous healthcare worker, but her confidence emanated. Morgan sat on a wooden stool at their kitchen table, nibbling on the seedy crackers and canned mandarin orange segments that Diana put out. "Let's get to know each other," she said. "I like to have a sense of who's lurking in bedrooms around here." But her voice sounded amused and chipper, not angry. "Mom, this is Morgan Flowers," Sadie said. "I wouldn't say Morgan is a bedroom lurker, thank you." "The Morgan Flowers," Diana said. "A pleasure." Morgan tried to swallow the smile that arose from knowing that Sadie had spoken to her mom about them enough times to be recognized as the Morgan Flowers. There was such an ease between Sadie and her mom. When Diana glanced at the bowl of crackers, Sadie handed it to her mid-sentence, neither one of them missing a beat. Diana asked Morgan about their job, the SATs, whether they liked that fancy school up on the hill as much as Sadie did, all the while ruffling Sadie's hair from the back. They smiled the same way, a little dimple on the right side. "Sadie, you know what would be good with the salsa?" "You read my mind," Diana said, dropping her hand while Sadie retreated to the refrigerator. "So, what do your parents do, Morgan?" "My dad works in IT at an educational media company." Morgan tried to keep their tone even, affable, but they thought of their phone screen. Unknown, 3 missed calls. They watched Sadie slide into the seat next to Diana's and bang the edge of the jar on the table so that it would be easier to twist open, and a chasm opened in Morgan's chest. Morgan watched Diana note the omission. "Good salsa," she said. "You want some?" "No, thanks." "It's actually not good at all," she said, "but it is something else." "You mean it was on sale?" Sadie said. "It tastes like a cumin factory exploded." There was a brief pause, and Morgan wondered if Diana was feeling that sense of her home being observed, watching their eyes glaze over the summit of mail on the dining room table and the faded spots on the chair cushions. "You gotta pick and choose in this life, kid," Diana said, waving her chip through the air. She gave Morgan a little smile, which they didn't totally understand, but felt the warmth of anyhow. What would it be like to have a mom like this, who cared about your feelings on salsa, who wanted to know about whether the stranger in your bedroom played a team sport? Diana invited Morgan to stay for dinner, but they couldn't imagine facing the squad of Sadie's brothers. They said they could hang out for a little while, but needed to get back to their dad for dinner, and carefully Sadie led them back to her bedroom, this time with the door conspicuously ajar. Instead of the bed, the two of them sat on the floor, cross-legged on Sadie's spongy carpet. Morgan stared at the lofted bed for a second, feeling that those kissing moments were already surreal, sliding into the place in their memory that felt reserved for vivid dreams. Sadie reached forward to squeeze Morgan's knee. Sorry about the questioning, she said. I know it must be hard with your mom. Yeah, Morgan said. And then, all at once, they were telling Sadie everything from the beginning. How Zoe up and disappeared, getting on a flight to Denmark without a word. Dad and Grandma Cheryl found her car and credit card receipts, and eventually she called her father, not Morgan's dad, to let everyone know she was alive and in Europe for a while, to clear her head. How that head-clearing time unraveled into most of forever. How little time Morgan had ever spent with Zoe, except for that one brief summer when Morgan was 9, when Zoe emerged and wanted to be their mom again. Before she abandoned Morgan in the park, it had been going really well, suspiciously well. The two of them, side by side on a wrought iron bench, eating pistachio gelato in Verdi Square on 72nd Street, and then going shopping for hats. Zoe talked about how her mother, Sally, had loved tulips and skeletons. She'd studied archaeology or something. It was all so hazy now, the weeks that unfurled carefully before the park incident. Morgan couldn't even have said how long she'd been away before they panicked. Long enough to make friends with a pigeon that couldn't seem to remember how to fly away. Morgan had spent a long time deciding what the right name was for that pigeon, but now couldn't remember what it was. Something Britishly regal. Oliver? George? That sad, purring bird with its bulgy eyes. It could have explored the whole beautiful city, but it stayed there instead, watching Morgan flip out and puke and cry all over their shirt, specially laundered for a day in the city. Watching Morgan decide it was worth asking a stranger for their cell phone and calling Dad at the office at the number they'd been forced to memorize in case of emergencies. I didn't mean to be gone so long, she'd repeated, over and over, when she'd returned to the picnic blanket. No wonder she'd left. Morgan, Sadie said gently when they were done, that wasn't your fault. You're not supposed to dump your kid in a public park and disappear. That's like the antithesis of parenthood. Morgan shrugged. I just wish I knew where she was now. Sadie twisted to reach the laptop on her desk. Let's find out then. What's her last name? And Morgan watched in suspended animation as Sadie typed the words that Morgan had thought of so often. Zoe Willis. Google spat out search results in an instant, in a fraction of the time it took to cajole the salsa jar into opening. Morgan hadn't considered that it would be quite so easy. Or maybe they had, but they were too afraid to deal with the consequences of that ease. And now here it was. Daughter of Harris and Sally Willis, both deceased, survived by one brother, Albert. The family had lived on the Upper West Side, in an apartment that they still owned. Morgan noted the address, repeated it a few times in their head. They would look it up on Google Earth later. Zoe had her own page on an interior design firm's website. The header of the page was decorated with droopy, fat blossoms in saturated pinks and reds. On the bio page, it read, Zoe Willis, age 34, lives in Lisbon, Portugal, with her partner, entrepreneur Brigid Holm, and went on to list interiors of people's fancy-looking bedrooms and home offices with links. Did you know your mom is into ladies? Sadie asked. Morgan shook their head. I don't know anything she's into, they said, their voice sounding far away. They wondered if they should have feelings about this information, but it registered just the same as the other tangle of facts, distant and befuddling. They could picture Brigid's name on the return address of an envelope, pointy and narrow. A pen pal, Dad had always said, vaguely. Morgan relayed this information to Sadie, lines of sweat creeping into their palms. Sadie tilted her head. Is your dad the kind of person to be friends with his ex's new partner? She said quizzically. I don't know, Morgan said. Maybe. Morgan watched numbly as Sadie typed, Brigid Holm. The two of them crowded around the boxy screen, looking through pictures of Zoe and Brigid at fundraisers, on boats, in group shots clumped with evening gowns in front of country estates. Zoe looked like Morgan, lithe and pale, with the same shape to their faces. They zoomed in on one picture, with Zoe in a crimson gown that showed her shoulder blades, her hair gathered in a twist at the nape of her neck. If I were directing that movie, Morgan thought, I'd have her look over that bare shoulder underneath this street lamp. Classic Hollywood. Morgan wondered what it would be like to dress like that, and to have occasions for which there was reason to. Gotta pick and choose in this life, kid, Diana had said. I didn't expect her to be so, Morgan started. Beautiful, they thought. Rich, Sadie supplied. Morgan tried to picture themselves on Zoe's arm, waving at a camera. For one brief moment, they allowed themselves a fantasy of dressing in one of those luxurious outfits. They pictured silks, leather that gleamed in the light, no worries about filling out soups with bits of tasteless celery, or maintaining their GPA for their scholarship, or whether dad had eaten enough that day, or whether somebody was eyeing their androgynous figure in the distance. Nothing but champagne flutes and tables dressed in deep black cloth. Nothing but Morgan with their mom, two heart-shaped faces leaning into a portrait of excess. I can't, Morgan blurted and closed the screen suddenly. It's too much. Thank you. Dana, hi.
That was such a lovely reading, Amy. Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you chose that scene. It's such a wonderful one to choose. You get such a beautiful sense of your writing and also how the characters relate to each other. And there's a Tom Hanks joke and there are pigeons. Wonderful. It was so great to hear the voices of the characters in your own voice as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so delighted to be part of celebrating this book with you. It's so beautiful. I feel particularly excited because I feel like I kind of had a little bit of a view of the book coming together since you and I worked together at Poets and Writers for several years. And in that time, when I would ask you what you were doing on the weekend, so often you would say you were working on this book. And you would say, I'm going to write the diner scene or the gala scene, or I'm going to cut 10,000 words in 2 days, or I'm working on edits with my wife, Christine, or your agent, Stephanie, your editor, Maddie. So kind of holding it now, it feels really special because I feel like I got a glimpse into the determination and patience and tenacity that it took to get here. So congratulations, Amy.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful book. I'm so excited for people to read it if they haven't already. It's a wonderful read. It's I was so drawn into the family and how they share their history of trauma and abandonment, how they find ways to show each other that they care and see one another. And also, it's just like a joy to read on a sentence level, right? You remain in my head the queen of diction with beautiful description, like the perfect emotionally charged detail to help us understand what's happening on the page. So congratulations again.
Well, thank you, Dana.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to stop talking and ask you questions. So the book kind of is narrated by 4 of its characters, Morgan, Julian, Zoe, and Brigid. And I just want to know, how did these characters come to you, and maybe in what order did they arrive?
Yeah. So I started this book so long ago, even before we knew each other, which is a long time now. I started this my senior year of college, and originally it was structured pretty differently. So it was much more of like every pair following their own timeline. So Morgan and Sadie had a trajectory, Julian and Zoe had a trajectory, Julian's mom and Julian's dad had a trajectory as well. And it sort of morphed a little bit as I got to know Sadie particularly. But I would say Morgan and Morgan's parents came to me very early on, and sort of the book kind of took off from these 2 images that I had in my head, both of which were very bird focused, which was unusual for me at the time. Now I know a lot more birds in my life, but very early on, I had this image of like a 9-year-old kid in the car with their dad, and there is like bird songs on the radio, like an NPR clip of birds. And neither person in the car was able to talk about this big, dramatic, emotional thing that they were headed towards in the car, going to meet Zoe for this reunion. So the bird call is just playing and playing, and both of these people are completely panicked and unable to connect with each other. And then the bird that appeared in the section that I just read, the bird in the park, was also really connected to Zoe. I think I've always been interested in parallelism. That's something that was in my first book as well. The idea that just because you're incompatible people romantically doesn't mean that your lives aren't connected or running on these sort of parallel paths. And that was something that came up a lot for me with Zoe and Julian, and was something I was really excited to explore in this book too.
Yeah, that's totally true. That is that the parallel, like the characters going in tandem, is in both of your novels, and it's kind of one of the pleasures of them is that you get to read the perspectives of both sides of the parallel. And
Thank you.
I feel like I would be truly remiss if I didn't ask you about flowers because you are wearing this most magnificent floral crown. It looks amazing. I love it. And I also know that you had mentioned to me that actually the main characters of this book, you have a kind of corresponding symbolic flower for each of them. And also Morgan and Julian's last name literally is flowers in the novel. And so I wondered if you could share what the flowers were and what the thinking behind it was for each of the characters.
Yeah, that was something that came together kind of later in the book's journey. And I was so happy to kind of fall into that mode. I got really interested in the idea that, like, in Victorian times, when you sent somebody a bouquet, every flower meant something. And so, like, receiving a bouquet wasn't just like a beautiful thing, but it was like a message. And so I started thinking of the characters that way. So Morgan is the coral charm peony, which is on my head right now, and is my favorite flower.
Amazing.
Morgan is very close to my heart. I love peonies in particular because of the transformation quality. When a peony bud is like first coming up, it's so tightly closed, and then slowly as it opens, it becomes like enormous. Like they take up a huge amount of space, and they have these like transformative color phases. So, it starts out looking really, really pink and saturated, and then it fades into like a total white. And by the end of its like life cycle, it looks like a really different flower than it did at every other stage. And I feel like this book is kind of catching Morgan at this moment of transformation and kind of thinking about who do they want to be in the world and like what does that look like. And Morgan is like a self-sabotager, much like Zoe. I think that's interesting to consider in terms of like a trajectory of someone who's 17 and kind of seeing that element in their parents' behavior and being really aware of it is kind of an unusual thing, I think. So that was something I wanted to tap into for Morgan. Julian, who's Morgan's dad, is a protea, which are really like thick on the outside and kind of associated with like a tropical look. They're like almost like woodsy, like they're kind of like if you buy a protea, it's kind of hard to like trim it. It's super intense. It has like these really thick walls up, but then the inside looks like a different flower. And that's kind of how Julian moves through the world. Is just having these two sort of sides. A lot of people misinterpret Julian's affect because Julian's autistic and not necessarily like behaving in the way that maybe the person he's talking to is expecting. And so there's this idea of miscommunicating for Julian that's a big part of his day-to-day life and character. Zoe is a ranunculus, which is kind of similar to a peony, but like a little bit smaller. Like the transformation isn't as dramatic. In Victorian times, ranunculus is ranunculi. Someone will tell me what the good plural is, but they were known for being very charming and very reckless, and that's really Zoe to a T. There was like no contest for what flowers we got. So that was an easy one. Brigid, who is a character we haven't talked about yet, she's Zoe's partner and also Julian's best friend in the book, and that's something that you see a lot in kind of like queer chosen family, is just this idea that like if you're not a jealous person, like you can really connect with the people in the orbit of the people around you, even if they're like romantically linked, and kind of they have a really unconventional but beautiful friendship. And I would say like Julian's best friend in the world is Brigid, even though the way that they met is like a private investigator needed to track Zoe down, and like Brigid was the person Zoe was living with. It's not like the most conventional beginning to your best friendship necessarily. But I found their relationship really interesting to me, and it was something that I loved getting to dig deeper into. All this to say, Brigid is a snapdragon. They're known for being strong and gracious. They're also like really tall. And there's something about Brigid, who is tall. I also feel like she stands out in a crowd because she has a lot of confidence and like sort of a more sophisticated like fashion sense than other people are used to. She just seems sort of like she's existing in a different plane. So I took that pretty literally. And Sadie is a lupine, which is such an interesting flower. They have a lot of them in Iceland. Hi, Rachel. They grow everywhere. They need like basically nothing to grow and thrive. And Sadie is a person who's really like, she can take a crumb and make it a meal. And that's something that I think that resourcefulness is really something that the other characters aspire to and don't really know what to do with. So it was really fun to think of those elements of their personality and relationships in like a visual fashion. That was really cool.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. A floral reading of all the things we don't talk about. That's so I feel like it shows how much you like you know your characters, and that they're really like people with you, and that you see them in these ways. Yeah. And now I love knowing it's a peony. That's amazing, Amy. So to return a little bit to the idea of parallelism, you know, this book is kind of like it's a love story between Zoe and Sadie. And early in the book, Julian says to Morgan, "The truth is, you'll never love anyone the way that you do when you're 17." And it made me think a little bit of your first book, Will and Hesper, which is also a young queer love story. And I want to know what compels you to kind of explore that experience of love in the space of a novel.
When you sent over these like little seeds of questions, I was so taken aback by this one because I thought, well, isn't that where everyone starts a novel? Is like the love, isn't love the center of novels? And I don't think it is, though. I think you're right to ask that. I guess like for me, I would have such a hard time writing a book that didn't have that at its core. But I don't know that I'd be able to write like a traditional falling in love narrative. In my books, like the love always like really goes south and just tanks. Like with Willa and Hesper, my editor, who is a brilliant person, she was like, there's no happiness for them. Like we just like skip right over into just like Heartbreak City. And it was like such a good note for me to think about like happiness also deserves a place in literature. And I think that's interesting to think about in terms of like pacing and craft wise, but also like it's a beautiful thing to fall in love with your characters falling in love with each other. So yeah, I think it's always going to be there as kind of like the emotional path into a character's life for me is like, who do you love and how do you love them is such a good way to get to know a character.
Oh, that's so lovely. And I think that note that your editor gave you, that I feel like that's really true in my experience of reading the novels, that both have a lot of joy and a lot of disappointment, and that the presence of the other renders the other clearer and keener by contrast. So
yeah, totally.
So music plays a really big part in the novel, and I also know in your writing practice. And so in a novel that's called All the Things We Don't Talk About, music obviously becomes this kind of way, it seems like, for characters to express themselves or kind of understand what they're feeling. Like Julian dances to David Bowie in the living room, Zoe blasts Mitski in her car. So I wanted to know how you see your character's relationship to music and how it might connect to your own practice, since I know you listen to a lot of music when you write.
Yeah, oh my God, I'm so finicky when it comes to a soundtrack. Many apologies to all of my neighbors and roommates, and now my wife, for who have to listen to me looping through the same song 1,000 times while I work on scene for weeks. I think music is such a way that people can connect to each other emotionally without having to say exactly what they're feeling. And everybody in this book has a lot of trouble communicating directly, with the exception of Sadie, I would say. So I loved the idea that music would be a through line that kind of was a web around everybody in this book. When Julian and Zoe are first falling in love and they're teenagers, and this is kind of before the book picks up, but in the backstory, they really connect over music in that way that when you're a teenager, like every single song feels like it was written just for you. So they, talk about, what's the greatest concert you would ever see, or like, what, this song versus this song, like those conversations like mean everything, because I kind of feel like when you're that age, your taste is such a defining feature of your personality, much more than like being kind or how you spend your time. In a way, it's like, no, but like, this is the best brand new song there is. I mean, that's a different thing. But there, a lot goes into those moments when you're that age. And Zoe never really emotionally lets herself get past that age. And I think there's something that happens when you have a trauma, in this book, like Zoe has postpartum depression. She makes the decision to leave Morgan. She thinks that that was the right decision for Morgan. And that's a complicated moment that I wanted to like really, let breathe. But, she stays 18 because of that moment, I think. And so she and Morgan, who's 17 when she returns, are able to hear Mitski in the same kind of way. And it's this moment for both of them where Morgan is experiencing that as a teenager and being like, I have this connection with my mom that I don't know. We're so connected. And for Zoe, it's actually like a kind of like a landslide moment where she's like, I've never let myself get past these years, and they're my prison now. So that was something that I wanted to kind of play with, and having Mitski be like the portal that shows Zoe that moment. It was really sad to write that, also because I love that song, and now I'm when I hear it, I think of this, it's like a very complicated and devastating moment. So there's also like the happiness that music brings Julian is very different from that. And I wanted to show both, that music can transport you to your best place or your worst place really easily.
Yeah, that's totally true. Oh gosh, now I feel like I want to reread the novel now, having that all in my So for you in your own practice, what songs did you listen to while writing this book? Like, what's the soundtrack?
Well, I will plug something that got published the other day on Large Hearted Boy. You can listen to the soundtrack of this book. But I would say very early on, I listened to a lot of the XX's Shelter when I was kind of brainstorming the way that this book would look after I kind of decided that these parallel giant narratives weren't going to be the thing that moved forward. And then I would say Mitski was definitely like a moment. Like when I heard that song, I saw that experience I saw the way my characters would hear that song and it would connect them. So that was something I listened to a lot. For Zoe, I really liked pretty abrasive, like jumping out at you kind of music. So Foles has this, the first line on their album, What Went Down, which is from 2015. It was like a big point for me. He just screams, I buried my heart in a hole in the ground. And I was like, oh, it's Zoe. Like, here we go. So that was a big one. For Sadie, I also really liked listening to Sylvan Esso. There was something very atmospheric and sort of super absorbing about the way that their music is looped and produced. And that really, it made me feel closer to the younger characters. So that was something that, I kind of tapped into. There's also a moment in the book where they listen to Fiona Apple's song Fast as You Can. And when I was thinking about that scene, I knew I wanted it to be Fiona Apple. She has a very distinctive kind of growly and frenetic voice at times. I had wanted it to be a song from Fetch the Bolt Cutters, which came out during the pandemic. And that raises so many questions that I didn't want to get into with this project, that I ended up looking backwards to When the Pawn, ... which was one of my favorite albums when I was in 5th grade. And it's a really, really,
5th grade?
Yeah, I loved when the Pawn came out in 5th grade. It's an extraordinarily grim album to be listening to as in elementary school. But there's there's so much texture in that particular song, in the way that she says fast as you can, like as slowly as you can possibly imagine singing that in the rhythm of the song. And there's so much contradiction there, because she's saying fast as you can, like she's trying to, in my hearing of the song, she's really trying to motivate herself to like go get it, and she knows that she needs to mobilize, and she can't. Like in the song, she's singing it so slowly, and Zoe really, really struggles with those impulses of fleeing or staying, being able to face yourself. And I think a big question that this novel is interested in is like, how can you redeem yourself when you do something terrible? And where the line is between like owning something and like wallowing in it. Like, does your guilt serve to like move you forward, or is it holding you back? And those are things that, I don't know, music makes me think a lot about. So I was really, really focused on the soundtrack when kind of really dealing with questions like that.
Yeah, I mean that's all so interesting to hear, and I feel like really like connects with my feeling for the book and Fiona Apple. And
Fiona,
I'm still not over the fact that your favorite album in 5th grade was When the Pawn. So when you write, like, where do you think you go? Like not literally, not the literal where, but like metaphorically, where do you go when you write?
Honestly, I go somewhere pretty dark. Like I have a lot of I have a lot of trouble getting into like a writing space if I'm in a good mood. And so sometimes it feels like I'm like luring myself into some kind of like emotional fervor to try to get into writing. Like I'm torturing myself a little bit because I can't access characters if I'm like having a good day, or if I'm in like a really good headspace. So that's, that is what it is. I think when I find myself being really hypercritical of my sentences and the rhythm of my writing if I'm not kind of worked up somehow. So it's almost like I have to like lure myself into like a flow state that's like close to a depression in order to get into writing, which has its cons for sure. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But I mean, it sounds like you're kind of like hypnotizing, you're not hypnotizing, but you're kind of getting yourself in the right mood, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So part of the book takes place in New York City, but a lot of it also takes place in Portugal, and it's almost kind of the place where the characters are at their best at times. But I wondered, why did you choose Portugal, and what was it like to kind of research and write about a place that you're less familiar with?
Yeah. I really like the idea that traveling to a new place like shows you who you are in a way. I think like one thing that's really big in this book is routine. Like both Julian has a strict routine that he follows to like stay functional, and also like the other characters in this book have a strict routine that they're following to avoid their emotional like turmoil, or having to deal with their stuff. When you're in a new place, like you're so jet lagged, you're so like hyper observant, it's almost like you become a stranger to yourself, and then you get to like meet yourself again. Portugal was not like necessarily where I thought the book was going to end from the beginning, but I was in a writing conference in 2015, so I spent 2 weeks there, and I just was so enamored of it. It's such a beautiful place to be, but also like once you leave Lisbon, which is sort of like super touristy now and stuff, Not that it's not beautiful, Lisbon forever, but when you leave, like things are falling apart. So it's like there's so much infrastructure that you can see that's not being maintained, and you're literally like watching the decay of beauty in like real time. And no spoilers because this is mostly like an emotional journey type of book, but they do go to this palace, which is a real place that is like both super, super beautiful and grand and like the most opulent, but it's so poorly maintained that it is like literally crumbling. And when I visited there, like it's so weird to get off the train and be like walking along a road and then see just like this gigantic palace, and then you walk inside and there's like debris everywhere and people like cleaning it, just like visiting and cleaning up. There is something so striking and kind of surreal about that it really, really stayed with me. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, this really fits in with the book, because there's such a class difference between Zoe and Morgan and Julian. And Morgan, in the passage that I read earlier, kind of feels like that money is like a free pass. Like you have everything you want. You can't want for anything else. Like that's it. That's the answer. But Zoe has everything that she wants, and it isn't the answer at all. And so Zoe is kind of this palace that they're visiting together and kind of trying to figure out a way forward. So it ended up really working well for what the themes of the book were. And I was very lucky in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, lucky, or also perhaps it's just that when you're thinking so much about a novel and you carry these characters with you, that's kind of becomes part of what you pay attention to and see,
Yeah,
and what resonates with you. So that's kind of a wonderful story.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a little bit about Julian. In the Julian narrated sections, I was really drawn to some of the metaphors and the figurative language that you use to describe how he perceives the world. And a lot of them have a kind of a sense of like distance or remove in them. You write, his own needs were on the other side of a bridge obscured by fog, and his vocabulary still felt stiff and far away, and a feeling was, quote, a fire from the other side of the door. How did you develop this set of metaphors for Julian?
Yeah. So for this book, I read a lot about neurodivergence. I read a lot of neurodivergent authors, Instagrammers. There's like a plethora of folks who are educating people on these issues, which is amazing. And a term that comes up pretty often is alexithymia. And it's this idea that you are experiencing an emotion, but you can't identify what the emotion is. So you feel like the intensity and you can't place it. For Julian, like that is such a frustrating feeling, because Julian loves information and data, and like these unknowns really plague him. But at the same time, I really didn't want it to seem clinical. Like I didn't want to drop in the word alexithymia and define it. I wanted it to be like organic, as in we're in his point of view and this is how he is thinking about it. I wanted to kind of tap into the idea of it being like natural, like there's a fire or a bridge or fog, because Julian, more than the other characters in this book, kind of thinks of himself as part of an ecosystem, and part of like the natural world. And that was something that was interesting for me to work with his perspective compared to some of the other characters. But also there was something interesting narratively about Julian not being able to like understand exactly what his feelings were, especially when he's overwhelmed or kind of like too stressed out to get into that. And Zoe's unwillingness to think about her feelings at all. And so even though Zoe is neurotypical and they're coming at this feeling from very different angles and they affect them differently, Zoe also can't access herself emotionally at times. And so it was another kind of example of the parallelism between the two of them that's even though they're not interacting that much in the course of the real time, like timeline of the book, they're still kind of in conversation with each other in these ways.
Yeah, that's totally true. I felt like that kind of rhyming of those metaphors of like the distance it takes to kind of articulate or understand your own feelings.
Yeah, for sure.
I also, since you said you started this novel such a long time ago and it's gone through different forms, different parallels, I think it could be quite easy to give up on a project that maybe you started in college. I think a lot of people write something in college that they don't return to. So I'm curious why you didn't give up.
Yeah, I'm so stubborn. No, I think it didn't really let go of me. I have probably hundreds of pages of this project in first person. I was just really, really tethered to this idea that it was going to be first person all the way through. I think that was also much more fashionable kind of in 2010 to have a lot of like first person narrators through multiple narratives. And it just wasn't working. I would get, 25,000 words into it. It would totally buckle. I'd start over. And then I put it away for a while. I was like, okay, it's just not happening right now. I started working on Willa and Hesper. I came back to that as we started editing Willa and Hesper. And I was just like walking home from the train one day and I thought, oh, it's supposed to be in third person. It was like this epiphany moment that's so incredibly simple and honestly like kind of embarrassing to think about. But after that, because I had just like twisted around the plot and like kind of emotional movements so much, it happened pretty fast after that. And then it was like a monster. It was like 130,000 words and needed to be like curtailed very severely. But it felt right from the beginning once I started in third person. Hello.
Oh my gosh.
I see you.
Amazing, a lightning bolt for third person. I love hearing that. Thank you for sharing it.
So simple.
Ooh, I think you're muted.
You actually.
Hello.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Hi. I was so excited about the Fiona Apple mention.
Oh.
That was great. Always happy to share music taste with authors.
Yes.
All right. Looks like we have 3 questions, and this first one is a long one. So, this one's from Carrie Colin. The food descriptions in your writing and the way characters share food always feel so specific and full of humor and texture, and so particular to each character. Can you talk about how your characters' relationships to food come to be? Is it similar to the flowers/songs where each character has a food that represents them? Or do you see food as more like an element of setting or a connecting factor between people?
That is such a good and deeply Carrie question. I think food feels pivotal to me from the start. I think I always had this image of Julian and his peanut butter and jelly sandwich that was like not negotiable. It was like, this is it. There's only one way to do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I also had a really strong image of Brigid being a very good cook, whereas Zoe is kind of just like in kind of her general life, grabbing anything that's there. And for Morgan, when like for lots of people, when like the main goal of food is to be fed because you're on a really tight budget and you're worried about money, like Morgan looks at food really differently. So, if Morgan and Sadie go on a date, they're looking at the menu being like, what can I afford? What could I afford to get Sadie? Is she going to get a soda? If she gets a soda, what next? Like those are things that really tied in for Morgan right away. So it was interesting in this book because everyone's relationships to food are very defined that way. And in the other books I've written, it's been sort of like food equals pleasure, not food equals substance. And so for the book I'm working on now, I wanted to get back to food equals pleasure. And, there's a lot of sort of like me luxuriating in descriptions of guacamole that I'm going to have to cut later, but it's a whole journey. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, food is cultural, economic.
For sure.
Yeah, we love food. This is a foodie bookstore. Forgot what it was called for a second. Thank you for the question, Carrie. All right, Emily McCann asks, can you talk about your growth as a writer from your debut to this novel?
My goodness, what a question. Yeah, I think when I was first writing, so Willa and Hesper wasn't the first novel that I had written. I worked on a thesis in grad school, and I did so many changes to that thesis. I think that really taught me what I know about editing and also to be like less precious. Like when I started working on my thesis, it was like, I will not change any of the following 15 things. I'm going to die on this hill. And it's like, you can only die on the hill for 2 or 3 things. You can't die on the hill for 13 things, or, you know, whatever. Willa and Hesper was really emotional to work on. It was really overtly political, and that was very draining in a way. This book is also political, but not like, as in like you can find the name of actual politicians who are doing evil things in this book. It's kind of the backdrop. I think I thought more about shelf life and like, what is this book going to feel like in a few years, and hopefully like long term. Those were things that I wasn't really thinking about with Willa and Hesper, because it was my first book, and it's kind of, I felt like it was an announcement of who I was as like a writer and a person in this world. And with this book, I was like, how can I craft a meaningful story from these people that I know very well? And I think that was a good route, because when you put everything of yourself in a book and someone doesn't like it, it is totally devastating. And when you craft a story that you put a lot of work in, it's still devastating, but it doesn't feel like somebody's looking at a mirror of you and saying like, you're terrible. So I think that that's a sort of growth that I'm happy with, and hope to continue on that path of being like, you know, more able to look at it as art I've created and not as me.
Thank you. Actually, can I piggyback off that a little bit? What's it like just on the I guess less artistic side? Because you know, we host a lot of debut authors, and like on the, I hesitate to just say like business, but I guess, yeah, kind of as like building yourself as an author. What does that feel like? What does it feel to kind of have yourself more established, I guess?
It feels kind of wild. It feels like a very vivid daydream that I've had, and every time somebody pops in to legitimize it as a non-daydream, I'm still surprised. So, but I think you know, I work in advertising at Poets and Writers. I work with a lot of writers. I help people design their ads and talk about publicity and promotion all the time. I think this time, like moving forward, I can use that stuff for myself and like use that knowledge base more. And when I was starting out, I was just so overwhelmed that I wasn't really thinking about like, oh, you know, it would be a good day to post on Instagram, or like maybe we should think about, you know, we had like a really fun time thinking about ways to promote this book. I think I was just so intimidated and felt like an imposter, which I know a lot of debut authors, particularly like debut authors who aren't cis men, definitely feel that way coming into the industry. And I think with my second book, I feel a little bit more like, okay, I know what I would recommend for other people, and now I can take that advice for myself.
That's an interesting crossover. The advertising and being an author yourself sounds like a lot.
Yeah, it's busy.
All right, and then last question from Kelly Trapnell. Which is your favorite Tori song to write to?
Kelly. I actually can't write to Tori. I can't write to Tori, and I can't write to Bjork. They are my two big musical loves of my life. For the most part, I find that to be too absorbing in my own life to write to. So I have to get absorbed into something that doesn't bring me through like a rotating like cascade of memories from my entire like life. It has to be something that evokes emotion, but not quite so much emotion or memories, I guess.
Yeah, I think we all have those albums.
Yeah.
I cannot listen to AM by Arctic Monkeys without feeling like I'm in high school again.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no further questions from anyone, I think we're good to wrap up semi-early, like 6 minutes early. But this has been so wonderful, and thank you both for joining us, and not only spending some time with your local indie bookstore, but also just sharing your work and your wonderful insights into the creation of this art piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for stopping by, and don't forget to press that little green button and get your signed copy if you haven't already. And check out Dana's work too. Dana, would you like to plug anything or no? Okay. Dana has never written a book in her life, actually.
We love you, Dana.
One day. We'll circle back some other time.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All done?